Welcome. My name is Halcyon. This is Hug Nation. Thank you. It is a gift to share this moment with you. Today I want to talk about issues revolving violence and terrorism around the world. And I want to preface it by saying that I am not a scholar. I am not a news hound. I have a very surface level understanding of the political issues in our world. So I'm speaking to human issues, to issues of compassion, to issues of personal peace amidst a chaotic world. And I also want to acknowledge that if I speak esoterically or conceptually about tragedy or disaster, I don't mean to minimize the pain, tragedy of each personal experience. All of our experience of the world are relative, all the pain, all the upset. And so whatever experience you are having surrounding tragedy is valid and significant. And so my heart goes out to all families and friends, everyone who is connected to some of the recent tragedies, in not so recent tragedies. This pain and suffering is part of the human experience, and so it is these times like this that we can maybe use these universal experiences of suffering as one of the tools that connects us, as one of the tools that can lower those walls between us and them. It can also be an experience that raises those bars, and that's why I want to address it from a human perspective, not from a political or issue-based perspective, because it is in the times of crisis and massive pain that we have the most dangerous and potential of how we react. There has always, there will always be violence in the world. The earth is a place of constant flux and violent opposition. The state of nature is one of extreme violence. So when these acts happen, whether it's a natural tragedy of a tornado or an earthquake, or whether it's a human act of terrorism or war, these are not shifts in the way the world is. These are simply reminders of the way the world is. And that isn't to say that you should limit your appreciation or joy or the wonder and awe of the world. On the contrary, it should be a reminder of the preciousness, of the amazingness, of the grand drama of the experience of being alive that we are in the middle of. And we have so many moments in our lives when we are not in that state of life or death, hunger, and kill or be killed. That is the state of nature for many species and has been the state of humanity through many years. We have the luxury to take breaths, the luxury to sit in relationship, to sit in silence, to enjoy hobbies and sports and drama and television and television, what's that? It's what they used to use to get Netflix and YouTube. Ah, right, yes. I wrote something the night of the Paris attack, and it was acknowledged, my heart goes out and my prayers and wishes and thoughts go out to those who are hurting, as well as to those who have done hurt. And some people's reaction was like, you can't, good vibes aren't going to solve anything. Good vibes aren't going to fix anything. And I think I understand the sentiment of that, but I disagree. Because one of the most dangerous things about a time like this is when we get swept up into a reaction that makes things worse or perpetuates a cycle or increases the heat and the tension. The US bombed ISIS targets in August of this year, and over 450 civilians were killed, 100 of which were children. Now, I don't know the details that led up to those attacks. I don't know the specifics of ISIS's formation. There's all sorts of complicated issues, but within that narrative, you can see that it is not an isolated act of pure evil. It is a human drama that goes back and forth and up and down and reaction and action, cause and effect. And when our effect is violence, anger, justice, it doesn't close the book on that chapter. It simply creates more pages for us to write longer and longer, more intense stories of hate and pain and destruction and death. The finger is often pointed at religion as what is the cause for terrorism. But violence and oppression and feeling helpless is what causes terrorism. Imagine you are a family member of one of the people killed in a raid against ISIS. You're one of the innocents. You don't have a dog in the fight until now. Now you have a very personal, visceral experience of someone you loved dying at the hands of an oppressor a world away. Now it is your life passion. It is all you care about. And if there is some pundit or some religious leader or some convincing voice that speaks up and says, "You've been wronged. Here's who wronged you. We have a plan to hurt them back." That's a no-brainer. I have so little understanding of what that experience would be like, and I still can put myself in the shoes of someone who's just lost a loved one to a US bombing raid and feel like, I want to strike back. I would love to put, trade sanctions against the US, but I have no power. And the US continues to push and make it known that I have no power. So promoting good vibes, promoting love, it doesn't change a policy. It doesn't put someone in prison, but it does stop the escalation. The massive power of the nonviolence that Gandhi practiced was that it stops the violence a little bit. It stops the cycle. When we act in violent ways in retaliation, we make true the narrative that we are a violent people, that we are deserving of attacks. When Gandhi led people to walk into the strikes of soldiers, you can't look at that and believe the narrative anymore. The narrative changes. You say, oh, this person is attacking the other person. And even while we seethe at how unfair and how unjust, we have to look at it from a 10, 20, 100, 200-year timeline to recognize what the powerful act is or the powerful response is. So when we see on a Facebook feed all these people in solidarity and putting up the French flags, there's a lot of reactions that I've been seeing from people. One is that of encouragement and a feeling of camaraderie, much like it felt after 9/11 in the US, when people of the world all felt like we were a little bit more connected against these acts of senseless violence. And I've also seen reactions that are frustrated that there's so much camaraderie surrounding France and not so much around African and Middle Eastern countries. And I think that both of those responses are absolutely valid and absolutely worth exploring. What I don't feel is valid is when people start finger pointing that your reaction is wrong, your reaction is racist, your reaction is not an acceptable or not the right way to respond to this kind of terror. Any tragedy requires compassion, and each of us experience our reaction in a very personal way, and if people want to express their compassion specifically to one person that died, that does not mean that they are happy that anyone else died. It means that that one struck a chord in them. So I posted something, a little picture saying, you know, when I see people say, "Where's all the outrage about Beirut?" What I see in that is, I just learned that there's a whole bunch of other terrorist acts going on that I didn't know about, and the mainstream news, even though I know that it's kind of flawed and I don't watch it anyways, I've kind of been depending on my Facebook feed for giving me news because I don't kind of seek out the other news. But now that I've been depending on the Facebook feed and it didn't tell me anything except France, I'm upset that you're all racist. I think really the nonviolent communication way of that awareness is to say, wow, this experience of world tragedy being so focused on France makes me realize how tunnel visioned my perceptions and my media window is, and maybe there is racist ideology that is traveling through that. And maybe I need to look at that and how the news that I notice or the news that I support is ones that reinforce a kind of white people are most important. That being said, I think there's a lot of reasons why many people in the US responded much more intimately to France as opposed to African or Middle Eastern countries, and will continue to do so. One is the way that the story in France was kind of unfolded as being a hostage situation that then resulted in deaths. That becomes a story, that becomes a narrative that we get sucked into. And when it's kind of like at the end of the movie Seven, you're like, whoa, that is more intense when you've been drawn through this drama and the horror is presented with after the tension. That is really impactful compared to just seeing, oh, yesterday there was a bomb. The other part is that our understanding of French culture is one that feels much more similar to the US. So when we see something happen there, the line we have to draw between that could happen here is way shorter. Most of our understanding of a daily life in Beirut is minimal. If anything, we know about bombs going off there all the time. That's the only real peak we have. And so when we hear another terrorist attack, it feels like that, another one. And our outrage meter doesn't get the same kind of, oh my gosh, this happened in France feeling. I think there's something really interesting to look at in that I'm not exactly smart enough or well-informed enough to understand. I believe there is this cultural narrative that Middle Eastern and African countries are more violent, and therefore when something bad happens there, it doesn't make us quite so outraged. But how does that compare to the US and school shootings? Like, are those countries that much more violent than ours? And I know it depends on how you define violence, and violence at terrorists versus violence amongst our own people or our own police force. And I think that all of these things are valuable experiences to kick us into some self-exploration, some self-awareness. I mean, I personally feel like this, as well as many things recently in terms of videos of police violence and kind of getting a peek at certain experiences of Black America, that I'm becoming more and more aware of how much I do have racist veins going through me. And I don't mean racist as in like I judge people of color. I mean that I have these patterns or below the surface assumptions or judgments that flavor the way I see the world. I don't confess that as like, oh, I'm a bad person. I confess that as that is how humans become grown up. That is how we be socialized in the world, is we have a certain set of experiences that we create worldviews out of, and we have education, and we have media, and we have, like, when the bad guys in every movie and every TV show look a certain way, I don't have to think logically about why or how, but it affects the way I see a stranger that looks the same as those villains do. It just does. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of experiences like this of pulling back and being introspective to start to sand it away, those rough edges of our judgments. Not to say that you can ever get rid of all of them. I mean, as humans, we judge. We make assumptions. But the process of a spiritual path and growth is becoming more and more aware of those things, more and more aware of when those thought patterns and judgments negatively affect your experience of the world. Limit your ability to love and feel love in the world. And grand assumptions about countries or colors or conflicts or religions, all of those things affect our ability to be loving and be loved. And it is our ability to be loving and be loved that is the only real path out of this cycle of violence, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, escalating. The world is an incredibly violent place, and the nature of species within the patterns of cause, effect, eat, be eaten, survival, the patterns of all species can be exceptionally cruel and exceptionally violent. And one of the powerful opportunities we have as human beings with conscious thoughts is the ability to sidestep these cycles, the ability to make a choice that is more in line with divine thinking than it is with material animal thinking. And so when we are struck and hit and attacked, we can respond like an animal and fight back and punish, or we can try to think like a higher being and understand the feelings that are happening, understand the pain that went into this act, understand or seek to understand the why. Seek to recognize that within even a violent outburst is an entity, a conscious being of light just like us that has been exposed to different pressures and stories. There's an incredible clip, I believe it's the first clip in the Human movie, Volume 1, where this gentleman who is speaking from prison, and he talks about his background, and he talks about what it took for him to learn what love was. And I won't explain the whole thing just because it's, well, yeah, I'll just explain it. And if you haven't seen, I don't know if anyone in the chat room has seen the beginning. The man talks about he grew up by being beaten by his stepdad, and then every time his dad would say, I'm only doing this because I love you. And he made this association between pain and love. And so he hurt everyone that he thought he loved. He thought that's how you express love, is by hurting people. And eventually killed someone and was in prison, and was still in prison, facing life in prison. And it was from within prison that he began being visited by the mother of the person he killed. And she showed him love and forgave him, and they continue to visit and have a relationship. And as you listen to this interview and you see him cry, and you see him tell you this arc of his awareness in life, it's this beautiful illustration of exactly what is required to get out of the cycle. It took a heroic divine expression of love for him to crack and go, oh, I have been an animal, a selfish, survival-based animal. She just showed me how to act and be divine. And that is well within my possibilities, regardless of what my history and my story is. I, too, have the ability to have that profound, divine expression and experience of love and humanity and that grand gift. And that clip, I think, is this beautiful illustration of one person going through that transition. And every person that goes through that transition is a healing of the world. And every time we can facilitate those healings, we get closer and closer to a world where terror is not just a part of the day-to-day experience of life. Now, is it even possible to eradicate hate and terror from the earth? That would be counter to the history of nature and the history of the planet. And in fact, I'm not sure if that's why humans are here. I believe we are here to push the needle towards compassion and love and connection, not to eradicate all pain and hate and suffering. And it always comes down to our personal choices. You can yell about the acts of a country, you can yell about the acts of a religion, you can yell about the closed-mindedness of huge groups of people, but in essence, all of those things are simply the stimulus and the blocks that which you need to maneuver within and around in your personal evolution, in your personal path of growth. And so all the suffering in the world, all the tragedies, all the attacks, and all of these things are part of the classroom so that we can make our personal choices, our personal evolution, our personal epiphanies of awakening, so that as we heal ourselves, we heal the world. So, I am grateful to be alive in this time, to be conscious and awake at the unfolding of the universe, all the beauty, all the miracles of the natural world, even the terrible and horrible things within it, all of it, the black, the white, the dark, the light. It is the majesty of the all that makes awakened experience of life such a gift. And it is our tiny and massive role within this light and darkness to push the line towards the light, adding love with a tiny step, with a single choice, with a single interaction that ripples, 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 and creates healing in ourselves, in the people we love, in our communities, and in the world. I am so grateful to share this path of learning and growth and evolution with you. Thank you for being a part. Thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for seeking healing in yourself and in the world. Let's have a hug. Grab yourselves by the shoulders. And take a moment to be grateful for this body. Grateful for the human experience that we have within this body, all the feelings. And recognize that the feelings and the ideas and the thoughts that we have are a product of our experiences and our socialization and our teachers. And that experience would be vastly different were we born in a different place or time. And so we recognize the limitations of our awareness and show compassion and forgiveness for ourselves, and recognize the limitations of those in other places and give them compassion and forgiveness. And recognize that beneath and below and before all of the socialization and the classrooms and the teaching and the well-meaning lessons from parents and bosses and teachers and TV, beneath all of that is this purity, this loving light. And let's be that loving light for 3 breaths together. Free from our roles and identities, just conscious, loving rays of light on this amazing, fertile planet. Ready? In through the nose and out through the mouth. Ready? Go. On behalf of Grandpa Caleb and all the Love Warriors, happy Hug Nation.